Welcome to our next day of our conference. Very rainy, very energizing, perfect for focus and debate. Our keynote speaker today is Shafquat Towheed. Towheed is a senior lecturer in English and director of research for the School of Arts and Humanities at the Open University UK. He also directs his History of Books and Reading research group and serves as impact lead for English. He has published extensively on the history and practice of reading. As the UK principal investigator for the European Read It project between 2018 and 2022, he worked with colleagues in digital humanities to pioneer the use of digital tools, including a chatbot, to encourage members of the public to reflect on their reading. He is currently working on an open societal challenge on engaging readers, co-editing with Sally Blackburn-Daniels a volume on Vernon Lee and the future of intelligence, and thinking about what the future of reading, informed by what we know from the past, might look. Shaf, we ready to hear what's the future of reading?
Thank you very much. And I just want to start by thanking the organizers, thanking Elżbieta and Mariusz and Alessio for organizing this wonderful conference and for hosting us so well. Wonderful Polish generosity and hospitality as always. And it's a great privilege to be here in the Adam Mickiewicz University, named after a very famous poet and writer, great contributor to European culture and knowledge. So I'm going to start with a few disclaimers. So first of all, you may have realized this already, but I'm approaching this topic today from my own sort of disciplinary perspective. I'm a scholar of literature, and I'm based in a department of English and creative writing and in a school of arts and humanities. So although I use and benefit from digital tools like everyone else does, I'm not a digital humanist per se, nor am I technically trained. So unlike many of the researchers with a STEM background here in the conference, don't ask me technical, complex questions. That's not something I can help you with. However, my own research, including work on funded projects, I've worked closely with IT developers and researchers and with digital humanities experts, so I have some experience of communicating across the different subject areas and different approaches. But I'm mainly here, I think, to learn from all of you, but also as a historian of reading, to offer you some ways of interpreting the kinds of changes in social practice caused by and impinging upon technological change. So looking at examples from the past, both from the distant past and more recently, I think can provide us with valuable indications of patterns of practice in reading, and it might indicate how future readers engage with new textual material that they have yet to encounter. Ever since the creation of the first human-generated sign representing a spoken word, the process of reading and interpretation has been in constant flux. Historians of reading like me will tell you about the many shifts and changes in reading practices, using terms such as intensive and extensive reading, voiced versus silent reading, close versus distant reading, private versus public reading, codex versus scroll. I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. Linear sequential reading versus random reading, and so on. Now, at the moment, I think we're living through one of the greatest periods of change in human history. We have an unfolding digital revolution, we have exponential increases in data, we have global mass engagement with multiple digital platforms and media, and we have more readable text, both for humans and for machines, than ever before. In 2024, we're at a particularly important point in the history and future of reading, not least because of the exponential rise of AI, and I'll say a little bit more about that later, which may well transform a human social practice into a machine activity. And I think the rise of AI opens up massive challenges as well as opportunities in terms of human interactions with text. If artificial intelligence means the machines are doing the reading, is the future entirely machine readable? Is human interaction with texts endangered or indeed irrelevant in the future? And what does this mean for us as researchers in the field? If, as it might be surmised, AI will do the reading for us, as we know it can. Does the future of reading even include humans? Are we, in fact, looking at a post-human future of reading? Now, I've called my keynote talk, What is the Future of Reading? But I should state this clearly. I'm not a futurologist. Predicting the future can lead to being held hostage to fortune. I mean, how many of us in 2019 could have correctly predicted the COVID-19 pandemic that would ravage the world? The fact is, most of us could not have predicted this. But if we had listened to epidemiologists, they would have told us that pandemics are historically recurring phenomena, and therefore it's certain and inevitable that another pandemic will happen in the future, even if we can't predict exactly when. So in the same spirit, what I propose to do today is to offer a series of provocations and interventions to make us think about how examples from the history of reading might help us conceptualize the future of reading. As such, this talk is by its very nature speculative. I don't have any answers, but I've got lots of questions. So what I did was I asked an expert, and these are the responses from the expert. I'll just read through them. So according to the expert, this is the future of reading. We'll have digital transformation with ebooks and audiobooks. They will grow in popularity. Subscription services offering vast libraries of titles will become more prevalent. We will have more interactive and multimedia content. Reading experiences may become more interactive, incorporating multimedia elements, and so on. Number 3, we will have more augmented reality and virtual reality. These technologies could create immersive reading experiences, allowing readers to step into narratives or explore content in 3 dimensions. Number 4, AI. AI will personalize reading for individuals by curating book recommendations, adapting text based on reading level, or even generating new content tailored to preferences. Number 5, there may be a focus on sustainability with growing environmental awareness towards more eco-friendly publishing practices, sustainable material, and reducing carbon footprints. Number 6, social reading platforms. Expect to see an increase in platforms that foster community engagement around reading, where users can discuss, annotate, and share their thoughts on texts in real time. Number 7, we might have accessibility innovations. Advances in technology will improve accessibility for readers with disabilities, including visually impaired readers, people with dyslexia, and so on. And we will have continuous learning and short-form content. So as life becomes busier, there may be a rise in demand for short-form reading material, including articles, blogs, and so on. And the expert sums up by saying, overall, while traditional print reading will still have its place, the evolution of technology will shape future reading practices, emphasizing adaptability, interactivity, and community engagement. Those are 3 things they've picked out. So far, so good. I think these are all fairly uncontroversial, plausible, and fairly predictable suggestions. I'm going to go through a few limitations in the 8 points generated by this expert, but can you tell me who the expert is? You've probably all guessed by now. Yes, it's ChatGPT-4. Now, I don't want to be dismissive of AI, because rather the opposite. I think AI is very useful. And every time you ask ChatGPT-4 this query, the responses will get better, because obviously it's learning from the queries and learning from the interaction. So it will improve, and generative AI will improve exponentially, and it's going to offer more sophisticated responses to abstract and open-ended queries such as mine. And remember, the response to any query will only be as good as the search query. And my search query was, what is the future of reading? It's vast as a question, and it's open-ended as a question. So I don't want to be too harsh on ChatGPT-4. But there are a couple of things that struck me immediately when I looked at its responses. And there were 2 things. So the first, I think, is it's mainly ascribing to the future things that have already happened or are happening. And I'm going to pick out a few examples of that. And 2, at no point does it consider the importance of human agency. So this is apparently about the future of reading, but the readers have completely vanished from the 8-point summary, because I'll argue that the future of reading is not just about technological change, but it's about human interactions based on changing needs. And technology changes and human needs change as well. So if we go back, point number one. I mean, I think this is largely correct about digital transformation, but perhaps a few things to point out. Any historian of reading will tell you that subscription-based platforms for reading are dependent on the prevailing economic models of the time, and those economic models can appear and disappear quickly. Let me give you an example. 19th century Britain. It was dominated by private subscription lending libraries. That was the main mode of reading novels, and this collapsed very rapidly in the 1890s with the introduction of cheaper printed single volume novels and different modes of distribution. We can have exactly the same thing with ebook and audiobook subscription services. They are subject to the vagaries of an ever-changing international digital rights management climate and the limitations of specific platforms and tech ecosystems, and, let's not forget this, the willingness of people to pay for content. And there's a lot of resistance for people to pay for content. We shouldn't underestimate this. So, number two, I think this is happening already. And I don't need to tell you, you're all hypertext people, you work on this sort of area already. But I can see that interactive and multimedia enhancement of, for example, reading short text in rapid succession in relation to AV content, it's already becoming the norm for younger generations, for the generation that have grown up with TikTok and YouTube. This is how often they read and interact. Similarly, for number three, again, I will defer here to people working in the video game community, for example. They're at the forefront of this sort of thing. One thing I'm really fascinated by is whether augmented reality or virtual reality could be used, for example, to resurrect figures from the past in a kind of immersive multimedia 3D encounter. Imagine if you could have dinner with your favorite dead author. Wouldn't that be cool? I'd love to do that. I'd go for a dinner with Byron. That would be my first choice. So number four on AI. I'll say a little bit more about that later. Number five, which was the point about sustainability, the focus on sustainability. This seemed to me the most bogus and weakest of ChatGPT-4's responses. Given that running an AI query generates more energy consumption, carbon footprint than a printed book, it's a particularly bogus response. Remember that books are made of reusable, organic, and sustainably sourced paper that can be recycled. So they are actually, in many senses, very, very, very carbon neutral. You can actually combine book production with carbon sustainability in terms of reforestation. So I thought that was a really bogus point and not thought through. Number six, on social reading platforms, this has already happened, hasn't it? And very extensively. So think of Goodreads, think of Wattpad, think of the explosion of fan fiction sites. We're already in that climate and have been for a while. So that's not the future of reading at all. That's the present of reading. Number seven, on accessibility innovations, absolutely true, but perhaps I'd point back to points 2 and 3 in relation to augmented reality and virtual reality. And number 8, continuous learning and short-form content. Without wishing to sort of say too much about my own institution, we have been doing this for quite a while at the Open University. So we do print and digital delivery in short form and other forms, which is often public and free and openly available, and we have been doing this for a while. But the thing I was disappointed by for ChatGPT-4 in its response is it didn't say anything about how AI could deliver this at scale. You know, we do it as a university, but couldn't this be done for hundreds of millions of people at scale with quality assurance and in a bespoke, personalized fashion? And ChatGPT-4 didn't pick up on that at all. Okay, so the summing up sentence about the future of reading generated by ChatGPT-4 is in fact oddly ahistorical. This is the summing up sentence. The evolution of technology will shape future reading practices, emphasizing adaptability, interactivity, and community engagement. You could actually say this in relation to any period in the history of reading, whether in relation to the Codex versus Scroll in the Roman Empire or medieval East Asia, to Gutenberg and movable type printed in Europe in 1450, to the rise of steam printing in Britain in the 1840s, or to the first e-book, Michael Hart's digitization of the US Declaration of Independence in 1971, which kickstarted Project Gutenberg. In fact, all through human history, technology has shaped future reading practices. But what's completely absent here is the way in which humans shape technology. Technology is developed to meet expanding human needs through an iterative process of use, testing, redesign, and then use again or eventual redundancy. And redundancy is very important. I'm going to come to that a bit later. Humans can choose not to use technologies if they no longer meet their needs. And the history of reading, as I'll show you, is littered with redundant formats, technologies, and modes of delivery that no longer have readers or users and therefore have no purpose. So here are a series of provocations. I've got 6. And I'm just going to use them to think with examples from the past to see how they might help us conceptualize possible aspects of the future of reading. So, of course, the book is dead. The book has been dead for a long time, apparently. So, books in the traditional sense have been with us for a long time, and long-form narrative, I include epic and so on, that's been with us for even longer. The imminent death of the book has been announced many times, with some critics falsely seeing printed books as directly threatened by the rise of digital modes of delivery. Sven Berkets, in his 1994 book, The Gutenberg Elegies, The Fate of Reading in an Electronic Age, made a polemical, and I would argue very false, argument that the digital was in dialectical opposition to print, and it would extinguish the printed book. Now, in the 3 decades since he wrote the Gutenberg Elegies, nothing of the sort has happened. And in fact, digital and print have reinforced one another, and it's led to the longest sustained increase in printed book sales in human history. For example, the first Harry Potter book, which was published in 1997, The Philosopher's Stone, it sold over 120 million copies. Ironically, Sven Berkets' own book, first published in 1994, was very profitably reissued in 2006 as a trade paperback in print only, contradicting his own prediction about the death of the printed book. Now, the contemporary printed book is neither dying nor dead, let's be clear about that. Despite the digital deluge of the last 2 decades, sales of printed books at their highest level ever. And in some genres, such as the historical novel, they show no signs of dropping off. And one of the reasons for the permanence of the book is its familiarity. We all know, or think we know, what a book is. And the other main reason for the permanence of the book is its persistence. Now, I'm going to give you 2 examples of some of the world's oldest extant printed books. So the oldest surviving woodblock printed book, which is the Diamond Sutra, on the left, 868 AD, found in the Mogao caves near Dunhuang on the Silk Road. And on the right-hand side, the first printed codex using metal movable type, the Jikji from Korea, 1377. Now, if you can read Chinese characters, they're both still readable texts. They're both usable without the need for electricity. They are both portable. One is a scroll, one is a codex. They require nothing more than the appropriate literacy skills to be readable, if not comprehensible. Obviously, you need to know about the culture and so on, and what the words mean beyond them being a readable text. Ironically, or perhaps fittingly, the world's oldest surviving printed book, the Diamond Sutra on the left, which is now in the British Library, is in part a meditation on impermanence. It's actually all about the fleeting nature of human life and how we're only in existence for a very short period, so we should reflect upon it. And yet it has survived, as you can see, in usable form for 1,150 years. Now, how many of us have confidence that any digital text, format, or delivery system will still be around and usable 1,150 years from now in the year 3174? Object lesson number 1. So the future of reading will be predicated by what is available to read, what survives through long periods of history, and what is persistently usable. And I think these are 2 really good examples because they're examples of Asian innovation and European conservation, which is the opposite of the usual dialectic that we're always told about, which is innovation comes from the West and Asia does mass production. But actually, it's often the other way around. I think kind of useful to note that. Korea is a really interesting case in any way because it had the first really developed codex versus scroll competition ecosystem, which also met with manuscript versus print at the same time. It's kind of wonderful example. Okay, codexes and scroll, codices and scroll. Let's have a think about this again. So, the codex versus scroll debate has been with us a long time. And I think the thing we tend to forget is the level of coexistence. I'm going to give you two images here. The first, as you can see, this is a representation of Virgil and the Muses. There's Virgil in the middle with his scroll and some muses with some more scrolls. And this is from the House of Virgil, which is in Sousse in Tunisia. It's from the 3rd century AD. It's a mosaic, so that's the substrate. And it's now in the Bardo Museum in Tunis, and that's my own image of it. I'm one of those people that goes around taking images of reading wherever I can find them. So, and on the right-hand side, you've got really interesting codex and scroll image from, this is painted image from Pompeii from 79 BC. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there's a woman with, effectively, it's a diptych, it's a codex, but it's a two-frame codex, and a stylus. So there's both reading and writing going on, note-taking perhaps. And on the right is a man with a sort of rolled up scroll. So I think, both these technologies have their limitations, of course. The scroll is good for continuous reading. It has no indexicality. The codex is brilliant for indexing, for making marginal notes, and so on. But, one of the interesting things is that humans have been able to pick up reading technologies fairly easily and adapt to them fairly quickly. I mean, human beings have been able to read text in both horizontal and vertical axes, as well as left to right, right to left, continuous versus discontinuous, and oral delivery versus silent reading. And all of those things are kind of present, I think, in these two images. There's one sort of format, I suppose, that I haven't mentioned here, which preceded both the scroll and the codex, and has persisted as well. But I'm not going to talk about it today, and that's the tablet, because that's maybe for another talk. But I mean, the thing is that technologies do not replace one another. So while the codex has become dominant in all sorts of ways, the scroll has not vanished. We still have scrolls. Scrolls are still in use, and I mean traditional scrolls are still in use daily. If you don't believe me, go to a synagogue. So Torah scrolls are used every week. People read from them. And it's a process of continuous reading. And the laws of the UK, for example, are written down on a vellum scroll for permanence to prevent any kind of data destruction. So scrolls are still in use. They haven't died out thousands of years later. And that in itself is quite an interesting thing to mention. But what I'm more interested in than scroll versus codex, because that's been with us forever and will probably be with us for a long time as well. And here you go. Here's some more digital scroll versus codex going on. On the left-hand side, you've got a sort of standard software package that will create a flipbook for you. So simulating the turning of pages in a magazine, even though it's being done digitally. On the right-hand side, it's what we all do all the time, scrolling on our phones. I call it the thumb generation. I'm not the only one to use that term. And I think we might think about readerly engagements with digital textual material in the future as competition or coexistence between thumb versus forefinger, rather than codex versus scroll. And this is another example of human adaptability. And let me give you an example of how quickly we've adapted to make these things normal. Think about swiping. Swipe left, swipe right. Is the future swiping? Is it thumb versus forefinger? I think, as you can see, from 2000 onwards, swiping has this dramatic increase. This is a standard Google engram for references to swiping in texts. And the Apple iPhone is 2007, so you can see where that is in the curve as the first, publicly mass-marketed touchscreen smartphone. And since then, of course, thumb versus forefinger has developed into a competitive, fierce rivalry in all sorts of things. So I didn't mention it, but Sven Birkett's book, The Gutenberg Elegies, had as its cover illustration an open printed book, a codex, with a mouse with a wire. And when was the last time you used a mouse with a wire? Again, that's like hand and forefinger first. But there are some. It's not completely dead, but most of us are using touchpads. And most of us are using sort of thumbs more than forefingers increasingly. Okay. Next provocation, mass extinction. This is provocation number 3. So I'm really interested in data survivability because I'm a historian of reading, and we always deal with tiny little fragments of what's left behind, and then we have to try and fashion an argument from it. I'm interested in what we might call extinction events. The history of reading is littered with extinction events. This is when large sources of readable text have been lost, presumably forever. Historians of reading like me, we have to use the research materials that are left, the texts and records of people who had read these works, and what has survived through the centuries, bearing in mind the vast majority of textual matter, whether manuscript, print, or digital, does not survive. So we're always having to extrapolate from fragments. One of the things that not received nearly enough focus is the issue of data survivability through long historical periods. And I'm going to give you some examples from history and a speculative one from science fiction to think about how we might learn from the prospects and outcomes of mass extinction events. Now, on the left-hand side is a Maya codex from the Mayan civilization in Central America. It's from somewhere between 1250 and 1450. Now, the Mayans were a very sophisticated civilization. They invented the decimal point and a complex calendrical system completely independently of all other civilizations. They had a system of writing, which you can see here, which was not glyph system, which was how it was originally conceived. It's actually a syllabary, so it's syllabic. And they had books. So they had the codex, as you can see, and it's not a bound codex and not a printed codex. It's a manuscript codex, and it's folded, so it's like an accordion. But like any other codex, it has a start and an end. It uses both sides of the page for text. It has illustrations. It's sequentially readable. And the big advantage of the accordion codex is you can open up 2 pages at once at any point without disrupting the structure of the codex. And this one is called the Madrid Codex because it was in 2 parts and it was put together in Madrid. And that's an image of a facsimile. There are about 500 facsimiles which were made in 1992 to celebrate the anniversary of Columbus and the discovery of the New World. And this one is on display in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. So if you're there on holiday, go and take a look, which is what I did. But it's really interesting because it uses, again, both sides of the paper. It is paper. The Mayans had paper. The paper was coated with a very thin layer of clay, of liquid clay, and then it was painted on. So it was handwritten and hand-painted, hand-illustrated. Does anyone have any idea of how many Mayan codices are in existence in the world now? Anyone have any idea? This was a large civilization, priestly class, literacy for centuries. There are only 3. There are 3 Mayan codices left in the world extant, and no one had the ability to read them until recently. So this is an example of a sort of mass extinction event. The Mayans had knowledge and content that was being preserved through books, through codices. These were significantly, they were specifically targeted and destroyed after the Spanish arrival in the New World. So, the priestly caste were enslaved or murdered. The codices were burnt, they were destroyed. There are only 3 extant in the world. And it took until the 1950s until the Mayan writing system was deciphered. And it is a syllabic writing system. It's not hieroglyphs like ancient Egyptian writing system. So what you have here is like a classic example of a mass extinction event, a sort of technology that died out, a readership that died out because it was only amongst the priestly class. It wasn't amongst the common population. So that knowledge wasn't preserved. So the data was lost, but so was the knowledge that went with the data. And we have these fragments. We have these 3 codices left. Now, on the right-hand side, I've got a science fiction example of data destruction. This is William Forsham's novel 1 Second After. And the premise of this sci-fi novel is that there's been an electromagnetic pulse attack on the USA, and it's set in a valley, I think, in North Carolina, and basically all their power is wiped out, all their digital devices are non-functioning, no one has access to electricity, and so they have to sort of survive in some fashion without any of the advantages of modern life. That's quite an interesting fictionalization of how a mass extinction data event might impinge upon us. Only today, the UK government has announced that data repositories are now part of critical national infrastructure. It was just announced today, because until this point, they haven't been, believe it or not, hence the hack on the British Library and so on. They were not considered to be part of critical national infrastructure, unlike nuclear power plants or the water system or electricity pylons. So that in itself is, I think, worth thinking about. Let's think of some other examples of mass extinction events and whether they were, in fact, mass extinction events. We've got the Library of Alexandria, very famous, of course, famous library destruction, destroyed during Caesar's wars in 48 BC. And we've got the Bait al-Hikmah, which is the famous library, House of Wisdom, House of Learning in Baghdad, which was destroyed by the Mongols in 1258. And the apocryphal story about the Baghdad library is that so many manuscripts and books were burnt or thrown into the river Tigris that the river ran black with the ink from the books. Now, we know that these very well-documented extinction events were not extinction events. Lots of books and manuscripts were destroyed, absolutely. But for example, in Baghdad, within 2 years after that 1258 destruction, there were highly sophisticated functioning libraries already in place. Because there's a difference between data destruction and knowledge destruction. So while you can destroy potentially physical copies of books and manuscripts, knowledge is something which is culturally inherited and culturally preserved. It's preserved by people and people who know things. And if they know things, you can write it out again or produce information from it again. So it's important for us to think about how data and knowledge are separate things, that knowledge can be more persistent and survive even when data sources are lost. Don't forget about the importance of oral transmission or about learning through doing. If you know how to do something, you can still know how to do something many years later. And I think the other important thing is not all data needs to be preserved or needs to survive. And I think perhaps we need to move from a model which is around data survivability and preservation to a model around data prioritization. Because let's face it, do we need that Instagram shot of our breakfast 100 years later? Does it need to survive? Well, for some researchers, yes. But I think there are important points to be made about what types of data need to be preserved and how. Okay, provocation 4. I am what I read, the future of human-centered reading. So no one ever reads the novels of Jane Austen for the plot, because we all know what happened. They get married at the end. No one reads Tolstoy's War and Peace for a crash course on Napoleonic history. We can find out about that much more quickly. Google can tell us about the Napoleonic Wars, or Alexa, or anyone else. But books like these, together with fan fiction and long-form narrative or sequential narrative video games, they provide a deeply emotionally and rewarding immersive experience. It's the first-hand work of reading these works, being immersed in the imaginative worlds, forming strong attachments of identification, and even fashioning self-identity that form what I would call human-centered reading, which is a very different thing from reading just for information. So this is not reading for a practical purpose. It's not to gather information. It's not for occupational training. It's not functional in the standard sense, but it's about individual self-development. It's about identity formation, and it's about belonging to a wider group. Gamer is the most obvious example of this. It's a well-known form of social and personal identification. But self-identification through reading has a very long history. There were Janeites, the fans of Jane Austen, long before there were video games. It's worth thinking about how these media modes pick up from one another and continue, kind of run with it. So my point is that reading imaginative literature serves a central function in defining who we are, our values, our beliefs, our priorities, and so on. And there's no indication that this is going to reduce in the future of reading. I think rather the opposite, with the sort of gamification of literature, with creative outputs leading to even greater personal and collective self-identification, this is going to increase. Now, this sort of intense affiliation is most evident in fan fiction and in new formats, webcomics and so on, but the underlying premise is an old one. Books have done this kind of heavy lifting in terms of identity formation for centuries. And I've given you some quotes here, as Tom Mole notes. Your books reveal who you are. They reveal more about us than our appearance because they're visible markers of our inner life. So browsing someone's bookshelves is a strangely intimate experience. It tells you much more about them than their clothes or their hair or anything else. Every book on a shelf, I think, tells a story of personal interaction and personal engagement. The book can only exist in proximity or in relationship to a person or people. And it's about positive selection rather than evolutionary extinction. Even if a book has never been opened or read, the mere fact of its ownership and display, how the book has come to be on a shelf, for example, is a personal narrative. It's part of a life history. It's part of a self-identity shaped in part through the emotional and psychological attachment to particular types of individually owned rather than collectively shared books. As Leah Price has said, books have the ability to become a proxy for a new kind of self and effectively provide physical evidence of individual, emotional, and psychological mental development. Show me how you want to read, and I'll show you who you want to be, she says. Now, writing just months before the pandemic forced us back into our private worlds, Annie Austen argued that bookshelves are a window on the soul. Your bookshelves are not just a place where you keep your books, she argues, but rather they're physical manifestations of the inner you. Your library is also your autobiography. Creative writers will tell you that everyone has a book in them, and the idea of the human library has gathered pace in the last decade. But the role of reading as a central aspect of defining your sense of self is far from exhausted, and I think we're going to see more of this in the future, because we all have to have a bit of digital detox now and again, and perhaps reading for well-being is a kind of logical answer. Now, we know for a fact that reading long-form imaginative literature, usually the novel, but all sorts of other forms as well, drama, poetry, sequential video game narratives, and so on, things in serial that last a long time, reading those and reflecting on it, sharing the experience, has multiple positive individual and collective social benefits. It increases empathy, reduces anxiety, improves educational attainment, reduces loneliness and isolation, and it improves communication skills. But, you know, everything in our current digital world is sort of conspiring against that sort of long form or deep reading. We have a burgeoning mental health crisis, particularly in the developed West. It threatens to overwhelm healthcare systems, and people have been turning again to books for solace, escape, reassurance, and their own mental well-being. So the rise of what we might call bibliotherapy, I have a slightly difficult relationship with that term, but it is one that's used increasingly, or you might want to use the term reading for well-being. This has been considerable and sustained. So you now have, for example, bibliotherapy incorporated into counselling services, into mental health support for students, online health help groups, and individual courses for treatment. So reading can offer a mental and imaginative space away from our overloaded, pressured, everyday lives. And at the same time, the increasing instrumentalization of imaginative reading brings with it new challenges. I'm just illustrating a few examples of recent publications on bibliotherapy. The one by Molly Masters, Bibliotherapy, I think is going to come out this week. So it's literally just been published. So we have this increase in digital content. At the same time, we have a post-pandemic mental health crisis, especially amongst the young. And we have people who don't necessarily engage with reading imaginative literature, but they could benefit from it. And the challenge, I think, for us is to encourage those people who don't necessarily read imaginative literature to develop a regular habit for it, to encourage them to think about how it could benefit them. Now, I've been working with colleagues, including Alessio and Francesca and Sally, who are all here today, to think about the deployment of digital tools to support reading, delivered through reading groups, through facilitation, in libraries, with school teachers, and to target specific user groups, young adults, members of reading groups, school students, and so on. And working with colleagues, we've established an open societal challenge and a plan of action. What we'd like to do is we want to use digital tools, such as a reading chatbot, and Francesca will tell you more about this later, and as well as analog resources, things like postcards and questionnaires. And we want to work with people to get them to think about how these tools can help them reflect on their learning and engage on their reading in a kind of informal capacity. It's a small action, I think, but it's clearly engaging with the changing realities of the present and the near future. On the one hand, we have a data deluge and digital overload. People have too much screen time, have too much information coming at them. On the other hand, there's a very human need to read something that's emotionally and psychologically engaging, that's imaginative, that can fashion another world where they can see themselves. And this serves a range of very pressing psychological and emotional needs. Okay, last provocation. Am I redundant? Yes. That's the simple answer. Yes, of course I'm redundant. In some senses, we are all redundant because AI will be able to do many things in the future, including reading a talk like the one I'm giving. It will be able to read at speed and at scale. It will be able to summarize information. It will be able to synthesize facts and arguments, and it will probably be able to do this better than I can. In the future, technological change, processes, and objective-driven tasks will be better done by artificial intelligence as long as we can overcome bottlenecks around opportunity costs, equality of access, and energy use. I think those are three really important constraints. I'm going to talk through some of these redundant technologies in a second. One of them is not redundant. AI, of course, brings with it massive and multiple challenges. If AI does the reading, why bother to read anything yourself? I'm not fully redundant yet, unlike the range of technologies I'm going to show here, and I'll explain why. Okay, so we've got, it's a telegraph machine, then we've got floppy disks. Anyone remember those? Yeah. Double index card catalogs. Anyone remember those? Teletext, CFAX. We had CFAX and Oracle in Britain. France had Minitel, all gone. The Olivetti typewriter, Model 22. Yellow Pages, which was telephone directory, printed telephone directories, which were very prevalent. And the last one, as we are in Poland, I've picked LOT Polish Airlines. It's an airline timetable, printed timetable. These are all, apart from the typewriter, I think no longer extant, no longer in use. They're historically important, historically relevant. But apart from the typewriter, they're all modes of disseminating information. They're about delivering functional information to people. And if the functional information to people can be delivered in other ways, then those modes of delivery, those technologies become redundant. And that's exactly what's happened. The typewriter, on the other hand, is a content generator. So the typewriter is not there just to sort of pass information on to other people. It's there to encourage some kind of creative engagement. You have to type in order for the typewriter to produce anything. And so typewriters are still with us, albeit in very small numbers and in a sort of bespoke, sort of creative industry fashion. Okay, final few points. AI will be able to do all sorts of things, but it will not. I don't think it can, but I don't know, I might be wrong, but I don't think it can yet successfully replicate the psychological, emotional, and intellectual satisfaction derived from the reading of texts beyond the mere gathering of information. People read imaginative writing for a series of hard-earned emotional and psychological rewards, and central to this is the effort needed. It's like going to the gym, no effort, no reward, right? So you have to mentally engage in order to get the reward. Why else would someone read War and Peace? This is where I think imaginative literature is an outlier. It's very different from reading for factual or practical information because long-form fiction, poetry, video game narratives, and so on are emotionally, psychologically, and imaginatively immersive. The whole point is you experience it yourself, personally, firsthand, without mediation and without remediation. This is as true, for example, for fantasy fiction as it is for the social realist novel. Now, without wishing to instrumentalize too much, I think, literary and creative works have a particular selling point. In an age when almost everything can be automated and done for us by algorithms, when things can be outsourced, the unique, imaginatively lived experience of reading a work of fiction does not have yet a substitute or surrogate. And at a time when the arts and humanities are under assault, perhaps it's time for us to think about this as something that makes us compellingly human rather than machine. Final thoughts and final images. Okay, one thing I've suggested in my talk today is talking about the future of reading as a singular pathway will be insufficient. There will be both human-centered and machine-led futures of reading, with the two possibly taking divergent paths, sometimes overlapping and engaging with one another, sometimes not. Energy constraints notwithstanding, AI will forge ahead with searching, reading, summarizing vast quantities of readable text and will be able to generate more and more sophisticated content. So the future of reading as a functional activity, one that is designed around information processing and dissemination, is undoubtedly one shaped by AI. If the process of extracting useful information can be automated, why should any of us read for information sources firsthand in the future? Because we won't need to. However, the future of reading that is centered on individual or collective self-identification, on emotional reward and mental well-being, will only become more important. I'm going to finish with these two images of the future of reading. So this is, again, ChatGPT-4 has come up with two images for me. I typed in the queries future of reading and reading in the future, and this is what it came up with. I think the images are wildly inaccurate and also incredibly predictable and conservative, and sort of factually incorrect in some ways as well. But I think they're interesting, but I'm happy to discuss these later. But one of the things it suggests, as you can see, is the persistence of existing reading practices. They're both reading books. One looks like, well, potentially I think they're both softback, but they're both reading, they're female individual readers in a private space with soft furnishings. Note the very comfy furniture. They've got lots of other things, readable text on display, books and screens and so on. And it's all about, I think, that personal identification, personal relationship to reading space. They're also wildly inaccurate in all sorts of ways, but I can talk about that later. Okay. Images, I think, suggest both the persistence of existing reading practices and, I think, the clear limitations of AI in generating anything truly imaginative or speculative. Thank you very much.